Konoha diligently works on her story, in which she gives her own name to the magical heroine. In her tale, the character embarks on an adventure alongside her love interest. The fantasy, however, is abruptly shattered when her mother bursts into her room, demanding that Konoha focus on her studies. Konoha ignores the request, insisting that learning about magical abilities is far more important than studying. She loves immersing herself in fantasies, dreaming that one day she'll be summoned to a mythical world filled with adventure. As she wonders what her backstory might be, she decides to write a farewell letter to her parents as a precaution, in case she's suddenly whisked away to live her new life. 10 years pass and nothing fantastical happens. Konoha grows up and settles into an ordinary job. One evening, while walking home from work, her mother calls to tell her she found Konoha's old letter from 10 years ago. After confirming that her mother can throw away her belongings, Konoha suddenly remembers the contents of that note. Then, as if fate were listening, a truck appears out of nowhere. Suddenly, she recalls her childhood fantasy story about a magical heroine who falls in love with her younger sister's fiancé, Jennifer. The two fall in love instantly. But their love doesn't go unnoticed by Iana, Konoha's younger sister. Upon discovering their relationship, Iana vows to put an end to it. Knowing how much Iana opposes them, Jennifer and Konoha decide to keep their love a secret. Despite Iana's many threats, Konoha continues to care deeply for her sister. One day, Iana gets her hands on a mysterious book called The Dark History, rumored to kill anyone who reads it. Delighted, she flips through its pages, forgetting that she is not immune to its curse. Suddenly, she's struck by visions of the real-world Konoha, writing the very story of the fantasy world she inhabits. She sees that version of Konoha shaping her, Jennifer, and herself, detailing their intertwined backstories. Then Konoha awakens in Iana's body. Before she can make sense of the situation, the police, headed by Shano, announce her arrest for attempting to murder Konoha. Startled, she realizes Shano addressed her as Iana, not Konoha. Trying to recall her last memory, she remembers the truck speeding toward her. Thrown into a dungeon, the truth dawns on her that she's been reincarnated. She reassesses her situation, trying to recall the story she had written back in middle school. As she ponders what to do, the Konoha from her fantasy world suddenly appears and pulls her into a warm hug, relieved that no one has harmed her. Iana stands frozen in a trance. She never imagined she would actually meet the Konoha she created, and she's exactly as Iana had envisioned. As Konoha fusses over her, worried that Iana seems dazed, Jennifer suddenly enters the dungeon, sword drawn, demanding that Konoha be killed. Konoha insists that Iana hasn't done anything wrong this time, but Jennifer is far less forgiving. He coldly reminds Konoha that Iana has repeatedly tried to kill her and deserves to be executed. As Jennifer lists the terrible crimes Iana committed in the story, Iana curses her past self for making her such a despicable villain. She never imagined she would one day be reborn as the very character she doomed. After a tense moment, Konoha pleads for mercy, and Iana is instead sent to a distant estate so she will be far from Konoha. Grateful to still be alive, she silently thanks Konoha for her kindness. She tries to convince herself that she can live peacefully in this new world, but her relief fades once she remembers who she'll be sharing her confinement with, a person destined to kill her. Upon arriving at the manor, a butler informs her that she will remain there for 3 months. Iana notices that all the maids avoid eye contact, trembling at the sight of her. The butler adds that a special servant has been assigned to attend to her. Iana peers into one of the rooms prepared for her, cautiously checking for assassins. To her horror, she spots Sol, a character she wrote to eventually kill Iana. He's introduced as her personal attendant, meant to make her stay comfortable. Knowing his true purpose, Iana immediately steps back when he approaches. Sol assumes she's simply exhausted from travel and gently insists she rest while he prepares a warm drink for her. Once he leaves, Iana exhales in relief. But her peace lasts only a moment before she remembers that she must avoid every death flag if she wants to survive. She racks her brain for the story's details, but it's been too long to recall everything. Finally, she realizes her best chance at survival is to prove she poses no threat to Konoha. She doesn't notice Sol's return. He quietly carries a knife to end her life. As he slowly approaches, Iana suddenly remembers that this is the moment Sol is supposed to make his first attempt to kill her, so she quickly turns to face him. Startled, Sol immediately adjusts and resumes his role as the perfect butler, pouring her a cup of tea and politely asking about her plans. Iana, catching onto his act, plays along while subtly searching for the knife she knows he intends to use. She tells him she wants to write a letter to Konoha. Once he's gone, Iana swears to herself that she'll live a peaceful life by proving she means no harm and will even marry a plain nobleman so she can be happy in this world. However, Sol soon returns and tries once again to approach her, his intentions unclear. The moment she notices, he quickly shifts back into his innocent act, presenting her with the stationery set he promised. Iana immediately gets to work, determined to survive. Her first step is to write a letter to Konoha, declaring that she approves of Konoha and Jennifer's relationship, and sincerely apologizes for all the terrible things she's done. As she writes, Sol quietly tries to make sense of her actions near the doorway. He is curious why Iana is suddenly sending a letter to Konoha. He delivers the letter to Jinafort instead of Konoha. Jinafort is surprised by its contents since it seems very unlike Iana to write to Konoha. Despite the apology, he assumes it's just another scheme, a manipulative attempt for Iana to get close to Konoha and strike again. Sol notes that Iana seems more cautious than before, reacting even to the faintest trace of bloodlust. Still, he resolves to fulfill his duty to Jinafort and assassinate her while she remains in confinement. Later, Sol returns to Iana's side and informs her that the letter couldn't be delivered because Konoha is out of town with their uncle. Trying to recall that detail, Iana remembers writing her uncle into Sol's backstory. It was the uncle who had witnessed Konoha save Sol from despair as a child. Without thinking, she blurts out the same comforting words Konoha once said to Sol years ago. Her words cause Sol to stare at her in shock. Realizing she may have drawn suspicion, Iana quickly claims she's feeling cold and excuses herself to return to her room. Once alone, she worries she may have triggered another death flag and anxiously tries to remember what Konoha and Jinafort are doing at this point in the story. She recalls that Konoha and Jinafort often managed to meet thanks to their uncle, who had always supported their relationship. At this point in the story, the two were supposed to meet again, unaware that their uncle had set a trap to capture Konoha. Iana remembers that in her story, she was only introduced as the main villain in the prologue. There were still other enemies meant to challenge Konoha. In the first chapter, the true antagonist was their uncle, whose twisted motivations came from his unrequited love for their mother. Since Konoha had grown to look exactly like her mother, their uncle had developed a sick obsession with her. He eventually lured her into a secluded place. When he tried to take advantage of her, Konoha awakened her hidden magic and managed to fight him off. However, Jinafort fell victim to the uncle's schemes, forcing Konoha to embark on a journey to find something that could awaken him. Iana tries to backtrack, recalling the sequence of events she had written. She wonders if Konoha's supposed trip with her uncle is actually when these events were meant to occur. Deciding she can't dwell on it now, she focuses on her immediate concern, and that is staying alive. Yet thinking about Konoha's kind nature fills Iana with guilt. Feeling desperate, she looks around the estate for anyone who might help, but all the servants avoid her. She sees Sol, who calmly reminds her that every servant has their own duties and that she can't treat them the way she used to when she was living in the main manor. She wants to argue but realizes no one will believe her story. Without another word, she resolves to leave the manor, burdened by guilt for the suffering her characters are enduring in the world she created. Grabbing some rocks, she decides to head to the capital to save Konoha and Jinafort. She manages to secure a horse, but despite having written that her character was skilled at riding, the real experience terrifies her. Meanwhile, Konoha, Jinafort, and their uncle arrive at a church. The couple plans to marry in secret, and the uncle convinces Jinafort to leave his sword behind, insisting that the wedding is a sacred ceremony. Iana races toward the church, arriving just in time to see her uncle raise his weapon against Jinafort. She knocks him across the church using the bag of rocks, ensuring Konoha and Jinafort's safety and promising to explain everything later. She urges Jinafort to take Konoha somewhere safe, entrusting her sister to his care. Alone at last, Iana exhales in relief, only for her uncle to rise again, ready to attack. Thankfully, Sol arrives just in time to save her, and Iana can't help but think how dashing he looks even as he lightly scolds her. Gathering her composure, she asks Sol how he managed to find her, and he reveals that he's been trailing her the entire time. Iana feels a pang of guilt for putting her characters through so much suffering and begins to feel responsible for their pain. As she prepares to leave, Jinafort approaches and asks if she's been secretly protecting Konoha all along from their uncle's obsession, suggesting that this might be the real reason she was so against his relationship with Konoha. Iana can't help but think how simplistic his reasoning is, but she decides to go along with it, realizing it's the best explanation to prove her innocence and avoid being killed. Before she can respond further, Sol interrupts, saying he wants to express his gratitude not to Iana, but to Konoha. He explains that it's thanks to Konoha's kindness that he's able to resist his urge to kill so well, though he warns that he would not hesitate if any harm were to come to her. Iana realizes that while she's temporarily saved herself, Konoha has yet to awaken her powers, leaving her defenseless. If anything were to happen to Konoha, Iana knows she would be the prime suspect in Sol's eyes. A month after her reincarnation, Sol takes Iana to the countryside. She admires the breathtaking scenery she once created in her own story, but a sudden chill runs down her spine, as if she's forgotten something important. When they arrive, Konoha warmly calls her over. Iana decides to go to her, happy to spend time with the Konoha she created. Before she can make her way over, Jinafort offers his help. However, Iana accidentally trips, forcing Jinafort to catch her. Sol tells her not to trouble Jinafort, adding that he'll escort her the rest of the way. She recalls that when designing Sol's character, she can imagine him as an ice butler, the opposite of Guinevere, who was made with fire in mind. She admits to herself that she had poured all her aesthetic sense into his creation. Though he's cold and intimidating, she can't deny that she's always found him strikingly handsome. As she fondly watches Kamenova and Guinevere together, Iana quietly swears to protect her sister no matter what. Iana recalls a time when she was still her old self. Her mother had once tried to talk to her about crushes, but instead of giving a normal answer, Kamenova proudly declared that she was already engaged to Guinevere, a man from an entirely different world. After working hard to prove that she's no longer the cruel villain everyone remembers, she's finally able to enjoy peaceful days with her sister, like flower watching. Overcome with joy, she lets out a cheerful shout but accidentally bumps her fist into Kamenova, causing her to fall. Almost immediately, several guards rush out from hiding to ensure Kamenova's safety. She quickly reminds herself to stay calm because if Sol ever suspects her, she'll be raising more death flags. She nervously explains to Sol and her hand just slipped. Sol studies her while sporting a polite smile. Iana follows when Kamenova calls out to her, eager to put some distance between herself and Sol's sharp gaze. When they reach a nearby clearing, a table has been elegantly set up. Kamenova happily announces that they'll be ending their flower watching with a tea party, and that it's a small celebration for Iana to thank her for saving her life. Sol serves her tea, while Guinevere explains that it's brewed from the highest quality leaves in the kingdom. Iana inhales the soothing aroma, finding comfort in its warmth. Back when she was working, she never had time to make her own tea and always settled for bottled ones. As the tea party continues, Iana hears rustling nearby. A small bunny hops out from the bushes and she calls Kamenova over in excitement. Delighted, she picks up the fluffy creature as both sisters gush over how adorable it is. Kamenova then wanders to the far side of the field where violets bloom. But before anyone can react, a wolf-like creature snatches Kamenova and leaps away. The guards immediately mobilize while Iana stands frozen, watching the beast carry Kamenova away, remembering that this exact event once happened in her story. However, that event was supposed to happen in Chapter 2 when Kamenova and her traveling party were searching for herbs to cure Guinevere. Iana remembers how, in her old life, she had created the carnal beast that would kidnap Kamenova. It was during a time when she was exploring darker story ideas and the concept of the beast had come to mind, especially since she often wrote while romantic dramas played in the background. Guinevere curses as the beast disappears deep into the forest. Sol notices Iana spacing out and she quickly claims she was only recalling what kind of monster it was. Guinevere's eyes widen with hope and he urges Iana to tell them everything she knows. By nightfall, Iana has recounted most of the beast's details to Guinevere and the soldiers. She explains that they still have time to save Kamenova because the creature will spend several hours observing its captive. She omits the darker parts of the story, only saying that Kamenova will be devoured if they wait until morning. Iana points them toward the beast's lair and the troops make their preparations. Sol, however, remains suspicious and questions how Iana could possibly know so much about the forest and the monster. Panicking, Iana insists that she had researched the forest before coming here. Unconvinced, Sol corners Iana against a tree and demands to know why she didn't warn anyone sooner if she already knew the dangers of the forest. Iana struggles to think of an excuse, but before she can answer, Guinevere calls out for her to guide them toward the monster's den. Iana eagerly agrees, believing that if she manages to save Kamenova again, Sol will finally stop doubting her. Iana leads the group until they reach a dark, narrow path she knows will take them to the creature's lair. Just as she's about to speak, she notices the deep worry in Guinevere's eyes. Turning to her, Guinevere firmly instructs Iana to stay behind with Sol. Though she doesn't argue, Iana feels uneasy about being left alone with Sol. Guinevere promises her that he'll do whatever it takes to bring Kamenova back safely. Iana can't help but feel anxious. She's loved Kamenova ever since creating her. But now the story has already strayed from what she wrote, and she's terrified of what might happen if Guinevere faces the beast on his own. Before she can think further, a group of guards suddenly rushes past her as more monsters emerge. She then hears Kamenova scream, and without hesitation, Iana bolts toward the voice. Because she had meddled with the story, Kamenova no longer has the magic that was supposed to protect her. Seeing the beast about to strike, Iana grabs the nearest plant and hurls it at the creature. Iana sprints forward, her thoughts racing. She reminds herself that she's supposed to avoid death at all costs. Yet before she realizes it, she's already thrown herself in front of Kamenova, shielding her with her own body. For a moment, she braces for the killing blow, convinced she's about to die, until Guinevere and Sol arrive in time, cutting down the beast. As the creature collapses, its tail lashes out one final time, striking Iana and sending her crashing into a nearby rock. Guinevere immediately rushes to Kanoa's side, checking for injuries. Kanoa smiles gently and tells him she was never afraid since she always knew he would come for her. Guinevere praises her courage. Iana watches from where she landed, feeling an odd sense of pride for creating these two characters that are perfect for each other. Sol suddenly scoots her into his arms. Startled, Iana insists she can walk after a bit of rest, but Sol dryly suggests that if she truly wants to rest, she can do so when they visit the man-eating plants nearby. Realizing that Sol is subtly pressing her to come clean about her strange knowledge, she refuses his offer. With that, their strange version of a tea party comes to an end. Iana reflects that even though the story is changing, the key events still unfold as she wrote them. Back at the estate, Guinevere privately tells Sol that he no longer needs him to assassinate Iana. He believes he had misjudged her, though Sol remains uncertain. Still, he swears to follow Guinevere's command. 2 months pass after the flower viewing party. Sol enters Iana's study carrying a sealed letter from her father. He assumes it's permission for her to return to the capital. But when Iana opens it, she finds an elegant invitation to a ball. Her breath catches as she realizes this is the very ball she wrote about in Chapter 3. On the night of the ball, Guinevere and Sol compliment the sisters, noting how radiant they look in their gowns. Kanoa's eyes sparkle with excitement as she takes in the sight of the dancers, while Iana warns her not to dance with anyone. Kanoa's confusion is clear and Sol's suspicion deepens as he watches Iana's anxious expression. When Guinevere takes Kanoa's hand to invite her to dance, Iana panics, but Sol's steady gaze prevents her from stepping forward, and she can only watch as the two move toward the dance floor. The scene brings back memories from Iana's past life. She recalls a summer festival where her mother had asked her to join the festivities, but she refused. Instead, she had stayed in her room, dreaming of being summoned to a fantasy world as a saint who would one day defeat a demon king. Her mother had grown angry and slammed her door open, demanding that she enjoy the festival. She used that dream to fuel the next chapter of her story. She had written that if Konoha were to dance at this ball, she would be chosen to embark on a journey to defeat the demon king. Without her magic, it would only lead to her death. Worse, Sol would surely see it as her fault and carry out her execution himself. She soon notices a man approaching Guinevere and Konoha, asking to dance with Miss Magnolia. Recognizing him as a minor character she once created, Iana immediately takes his hand before Konoha can respond, claiming the name for herself. She sweeps him onto the dance floor and spins so energetically that he can barely keep up. When the music ends, the man, dizzy and exhausted, excuses himself to recover. Determined to prevent anyone else from dancing with Konoha, she scans the ballroom for the next threat. A figure soon appears on the second floor. She remembers him as the second character to ask for a dance. The man spots Konoha and calls out to her since he finds her cute. When Konoha turns to confirm, Iana once again forces herself into the dance before he can clarify his intentions. After the second dance, her eyes wander across the ballroom in search of one final figure written to dance with Konoha. Just as Iana predicted, the young prince approaches Konoha and asks her for a dance. Anticipating this, Iana had already spilled wine across the ballroom floor, making dancing unsafe. The servants quickly advise the prince and Konoha not to dance. Konoha spots Iana wandering off to another part of the ballroom. Iana smiles in relief, believing she's managed to dodge yet another death flag. She hurries toward the buffet table, her mind already filled with thoughts of cooked meat. Before she can reach it, Sol steps in front of her and asks for a dance. The music begins again, and before she can refuse, he takes her hand and leads her to the floor. She feels her pulse quicken. Sol's hand on her waist, his gaze steady and unreadable. It's enough to make her forget to breathe. As they move together, Iana can't help but question why she is dancing with the very man destined to end her life. Sol asks who she really is. He has noticed her strange actions to prevent Konoha from dancing and demands to know her true motive, whether she acts out of protection or malice. When the music fades, Sol leaves her to call a carriage. Iana finds herself more disoriented than before. Sol's words echo in her mind, and she barely registers Guinevere calling out to her. Confused and exhausted, she excuses herself, saying she needs to rest and wanders to a quiet parlor. She sinks onto a couch, her thoughts drifting until sleep overtakes her. While she sleeps, chaos erupts. Flames begin spreading through the manor. Guests are evacuated from the building. Outside, Sol and Guinevere search frantically for Konoha, who is eventually found sitting beneath a tree. She reveals that she twisted her ankle earlier and Iana must have noticed, explaining why her sister had insisted she not dance. It's only then that they realize Iana herself is missing. Inside, Iana wakes up shocked to see the halls engulfed in flames and every exit she can see blocked. Panic seizes her as she realizes this wasn't part of the story she wrote. She steels herself and decides to run through the fire. She curses her fate as the villainess, the one doomed never to be saved. Still, she forces herself onward, convincing herself that everything will be fine as long as Konoha lives happily. A part of the building suddenly falls, pinning her ankle to the floor. Pain shoots through her leg as she struggles to move but is unable to free herself. In the roar of the fire, she thinks of the people she has met in this world. If her sister's happiness is assured, then perhaps her role is complete. Just as she begins to accept her fate, a voice calls her name through the smoke. Sol rushes toward her. She stares at him, dazed, wondering why he is always the one saving her. He tells her she cannot die until he learns who she truly is. He shatters a window, and together they leap out, crashing into the pond below. Konoha and Ginaford rush toward them, and Konoha wraps her arms around Iana, relieved that she is safe. When Iana thanks Sol, he refuses her gratitude, stating simply that he will remain by her side until he uncovers the truth. His words unsettle her, both because of the suspicion they carry and the strange warmth that now fills her chest. Now that her 3-month confinement has passed, Iana is back at the Magnolia Estate, enjoying herself. She feels blissful living alongside the characters she created, and things have been peaceful lately. Her favorite character, Konoha, takes care of her a lot, which makes her heart overjoyed. Ginaford chuckles at their interaction and compliments the good relationship the sisters have. Iana also deeply admires Ginaford, who embodies everything she looks for in a man. Another person she finds attractive is Sol, though she's afraid of him because he was written to kill Iana back in Chapter 1. As she watches him clean a knife, she reminds herself to stay wary because if she slips up even slightly, Sol might still kill her. Suddenly, Sol calls for her attention, informing her that a guest has come to see her. Yomi arrives and greets Iana, but she only looks at him in confusion. Konoha immediately recognizes him and asks how his studies are going in the Lily Kingdom. Iana remains puzzled because she doesn't remember writing this character. Konoha introduces Yomi to Ginaford as a childhood friend, explaining that their fathers were close when they were young. Iana observes them from a distance, assuming that Yomi came to visit Konoha. However, Yomi notices her and walks straight to her side, saying that he's home. And Yomi's face softens as he admits it feels refreshing to hear her voice because he loves her. This surprises Iana. Ever since her reincarnation, she's been met only with hatred from the characters who knew her. Hearing that someone loves her feels unexpectedly nice. She tries to recall if she had ever written anyone who loved Iana. Most of her attention back then was on Konoha, surrounding her with ideal men. She got the idea from a manga a friend once recommended about a princess courted by several handsome men. She then recalled that some of those men were hiding dark secrets. One of them had been a demon king who planned to kill the princess, which immediately caught Iana's interest. Early in her writing days, she focused on creating attractive and righteous male characters, but as she grew older, she began crafting handsome yet evil ones. That was when she created Yomi, another villain from the dark history. As she thinks about his character now, she tries to remember if Yomi had any connection to Iana's death. Yomi asks Iana how other matters are going, which leaves her confused. Finding her fiend innocence cute, he leans toward her ear and whispers Konoha's name. Panicking, Iana quickly insists on showing him to his room. She recalls that his role in the story is to kill Konoha. In the original plot, somewhere in the middle of Iana's journey to face the Demon King, Yomi was written as one of her obstacles, a man driven by vengeance after Konoha caused the death of his beloved Iana. Realizing that Yomi might be here to kill Konoha, she begins to worry that Sol could suspect her of being the mastermind. She frantically thinks of ways to stop Yomi, but glancing back at him, can't help but curse her past self for creating such a difficult character. When she returns to Konoha and the others, Iana announces that she'll be staying close to Yomi since he's forgotten how things work around the kingdom. Sol immediately offers to handle Yomi's needs instead, but Iana refuses, claiming they're more comfortable together than apart. Yomi feels touched by her words and agrees, though Sol grows increasingly suspicious of the two. Iana firmly denies any hidden motives, insisting that she and Yomi simply have a lot to catch up on before abruptly leaving the room with him. Once they're alone, she pushes Yomi forward and admits that she no longer hates Konoha. In fact, she tells him she genuinely loves her now. Yomi has a hard time believing her, reminding Iana that she once told him to send her the dark history, which he did. He then raves about how beautiful she looks whenever she's scheming to kill Konoha. Iana tries to stop him from talking, but Yomi insists that what he's saying is only a fraction of his true feelings for her. Yomi reassures her that even if she's evil, he'll always love her, so she doesn't need to hide her true self. Iana looks at him with concern and asks if this version of her is really who she is. Almost immediately, Yomi's emotions spiral, and he begins to blame himself for studying abroad and failing to protect her from what he believes is Konoha's brainwashing. A week later, Iana sits alone at a garden table. Despite her efforts, she hasn't managed to convince Yomi that she's changed. She realizes that his obsession is her own doing and never expected to face him in person. Konoha checks on Iana, and Iana instantly feels healed by her presence. Konoha notices that Yomi isn't with her, and Iana explains that he's probably still in bed. Konoha mentions she came to tend to the flowers she planted and warmly tells her that if she ever needs anything, she can always ask, since they're sisters. Konoha smiles and suggests they have tea together, and Iana eagerly volunteers to brew it. As Iana sets the table and pours the tea, Konoha feels spoiled by her care. Iana insists that she's happy to serve Konoha, her favorite person. Neither of them notices Yomi observing from a distance. Watching the scene, Yomi misinterprets the moment, believing that Konoha is manipulating and using Iana. Later that day, Iana wanders around the estate searching for Yomi. She searches high and low, but there's still no sign of him. Sol finds her around the garden and tells her that it's unlikely Yomi is lost, so she shouldn't worry too much. Iana explains that she's not worried about him being lost, she's worried about him causing trouble. As her thoughts stay fixed on Yomi and how she must prevent another death flag, Sol also finds himself thinking about Iana. He's still unsure about her motives and even more confused by the strange emotions he feels toward her. Reaching out, Sol touches her cheek lightly and admits that he understands her concern. He confesses that he too worries about whether she's worthy to stand beside Konoha, and that thought troubles him. Before Iana can respond, the sound of church bells rings in the distance and Sol excuses himself. Iana's body trembles since she thinks that moment might have triggered a death flag. Yomi, who had been nearby, notices her shaking and asks the reason behind her reaction. He wonders if Sol, her butler, is bothering her. Iana quickly denies it, taking Yomi's hand and warning him not to be so reckless. Yomi smiles kindly before assuring her that he'll be more discreet. He then reveals the hidden knives inside his coat and vows to set her free. Iana panics because Yomi still believes she's been brainwashed. She chases after him helplessly, trying to convince him to abandon his plans. That evening, Iana sits at her desk writing down everything she can recall about Yomi's background. A bad feeling gnaws at her. Despite his calm behavior during dinner, she senses that he's plotting something. She struggles to remember how she originally wrote Yomi and Konoha's confrontation. In her story, Yomi had lured Konoha to the rooftop of an inn they were staying at. He ensured everyone was asleep so he could carry out his revenge. Cornered and alone, Konoha had accepted her fate, but her companions had arrived just in time to defend her. At the sight of her companions fighting to protect her, Konoha found renewed determination to complete her journey and unleashed a powerful magic that defeated Yomi. Despite knowing Yomi's strength, Iana believes she can still outmaneuver him. Realizing he might make his move tonight, she rushes to Konoha's room. Sol notices Iana heading toward Konoha's quarters and immediately feels suspicious. Inside the room, Yomi slips in through the window and sees what he believes to be Konoha already asleep in bed. A knock sounds at the door and Sol's voice calls out, asking Konoha if Iana had stopped by for a visit. Konoha appears in the hallway with Ginaford, surprising Sol. Alarmed, he forces the door open, only to find the room empty, the window wide open, and Iana nowhere to be found. On the rooftop, Yomi prepares to strike the figure before him, convinced it's Konoha. Just as his blade descends, the figure blocks the attack, revealing herself to be Iana. Yomi is stunned to see her in Konoha's place. Sol rushes out of the estate and spots the two on the roof. Iana tries to reason with Yomi, pleading with him to stop. She insists she no longer hates Konoha, but Yomi refuses to believe her. He argues that Konoha is a tyrant who forces Iana into servitude, claiming that even this morning Konoha made her brew tea for her. Iana remembers that moment and tries to clarify the misunderstanding, explaining that she had wanted to brew the tea for Konoha, and that her real problem isn't Konoha but Sol. Konoha has only ever been kind to her. Yomi believes he understands the situation, though his idea is still far from the truth. He convinces himself that Konoha's kindness is just an act, and that she gave Iana a difficult butler to make her suffer. Desperate, Iana shouts that she needs Sol. At that exact moment, Sol appears just in time to hear her words. Before anyone can react further, a strong gust of wind sweeps across the rooftop, causing Iana to lose her footing and slip. Sol leaps forward and catches Iana midair, gripping the edge of the roof with one hand. Hanging precariously, he scolds her lightly for wandering into such a dangerous place, then apologizes for taking so long to reach her. As they cling to the ledge, Yomi watches them closely, unease stirring in his chest. Yomi offers to help Iana to safety. Once everyone is back on their feet, Sol demands to know what exactly they were doing on the roof. Iana quickly covers up the story, claiming she and Yomi had only gone to the rooftop to stargaze. She then nervously asks Sol if he had heard anything earlier, but Sol replies calmly that he heard nothing. Relieved that both she and Konoha are safe, Iana feels a wave of exhaustion wash over her. Once Sol leaves, Yomi questions why she bows her head to him. He's about to confront Sol about it, but Iana hurriedly stops him, explaining that if Sol grows suspicious of them, she might be killed. Yomi's eyes widen in alarm. Believing that Iana is living in fear and suffering under Sol's control, he concludes that the only way to save her is to kill Sol. With newfound resolve, Yomi leaves, confident in his decision, while Iana cries in horror, realizing he still completely misunderstands her situation. In middle school, she had once accidentally submitted her novel to her teacher instead of her workbook. When the teacher returned it, she mentioned having read a few pages and praised it as a wonderful story. From that day on, the teacher assumed she wanted to become a novelist. Internally, she had wanted to die from embarrassment. She wakes up screaming, mortified by the memory. Sol immediately rushes into her room, alarmed as Iana tries to shake off the thought. She tells him she was just remembering something painful but struggles to explain further, leaving Sol confused by her reaction. Suddenly, Yomi bursts in and tackles her onto the bed in a panic, accidentally causing her to bump her head. Sol reprimands him for being too rough, but Yomi shoots back that Sol has no right to talk since he also barged into Iana's room. Watching the tension grow, Iana realizes that Sol has now become one of Yomi's intended targets. To ease the tension, she tells Sol that Yomi simply overreacted out of concern. Choosing not to argue further, Sol excuses himself to resume his duties. Once they're alone, Yomi strokes Iana's hair and vows to eliminate Sol for her sake. Iana panics. Regardless of the outcome, if Yomi tries to go after Sol, it would still mean she would die. Iana's biggest problem now is stopping Yomi from trying to kill Sol. If Yomi succeeds, there will likely be a search for the culprit. Once they discover that Yomi did it for Iana, she'll also be executed for being the mastermind. On the other hand, if Yomi attempts to kill Sol but fails, she'll still be suspected of involvement and executed anyway. She begins to panic because either outcome leads to her death. The death flags keep sprouting like weeds, and no amount of persuasion can stop Yomi. The next day, Iana follows Sol closely but tries to keep herself hidden. She notices he's always by Konoha's side, ready to serve her. She realizes Yomi isn't around yet and feels anxious, since she doesn't know much beyond the main story of the dark history, as it is completely off track. Unbeknownst to her, Yomi is observing Sol from a window. He releases a small gust of wind to separate Sol from Konoha. When Sol goes to retrieve an item, he then casts another, stronger gust and sends Sol flying into the air. However, Sol maneuvers midair and lands perfectly in front of Iana, who is left completely baffled by what just happened. Iana quickly asks if he's alright, her mind conjuring gruesome images of possible injuries, but Sol seems surprised that she's showing concern for him. Iana begins to panic, thinking he might be suspicious of her. Sol reassures her that he's fine, and just then, Konoha calls out that she'll find someone to check on Sol. Sol admits he sensed a mysterious presence but reacted too late. He adds that it might have been magic but then corrects himself, saying it couldn't be, since no one in the manor uses magic. Iana freezes. She is aware that there is someone in the manor who can use magic. If the story had followed its proper route, Konoha should have awakened her powers by now. And because her enemies always mirrored her strength, Yomi should have magic as well since he had left the country to study poisons and magic. Iana desperately wishes Yomi would stop using magic before he gets caught. From his spot at the window, Yomi watches, disappointed that he was not able to kill his target. The next day, Iana decides to keep Yomi distracted by spending the day with him in the gardens. She spots Ginaford and Konoha nearby and witnesses a sweet moment between them as Ginaford gently insists that Konoha should continue her nap since she was up reading all night. Ginaford then notices Iana, who is shocked that he doesn't even seem embarrassed about being caught being sweet to Konoha. She also realizes that Sol is there too, having concealed his presence the entire time to make it seem like Ginaford and Konoha have some private time. Yomi asks if Ginaford would like to join them for tea while Konoha is still napping. Knowing that tea is one of Ginaford's land's specialties, Yomi tempts him further by mentioning that he brought tea leaves from the Lily Kingdom and can brew a special blend for them to enjoy. Intrigued, Ginaford agrees, and Yomi also invites Sol to join. Ginaford insists that Sol take the offer at least this once. Meanwhile, Iana worries silently, convinced that Yomi intends to poison the tea. As Yomi prepares it, Iana pretends to trip, knocking over the tea and spilling everything. She apologizes for being clumsy, while Yomi, misunderstanding, apologizes for using poison, thinking Iana disapproved of his method of killing Sol. Sol offers to clean up the mess and notices an odd scent coming from the spilled tea. Alarmed, Iana tries to stop him from getting too close, aware that he'll recognize the poison if he smells or sees it. Their attention shifts when Konoha suddenly sneezes and wakes up. Seizing the opportunity, Iana quickly tells Sol to attend to Konoha while she and Yomi clean up the spill. As she rushes to get cleaning supplies, Yomi gently catches her arm, telling her there's no need to hurry. Iana can't help but notice how gentle he is. It reminds her of the backstory she wrote for him, how Yomi came from a wealthy family but was constantly bullied by his siblings. As a child, he admired Iana's confidence, something he never had himself. She thinks to herself that Yomi truly is one of her ideal men, but regrets writing him to fall for Iana so deeply, since it's now bringing her nothing but trouble. She feels guilty recalling the part of the story where Yomi is eventually defeated by Konoha, who felt remorseful for having to fight her childhood friend. Konoha eventually overcame that guilt thanks to her charming party members, something Iana now curses her past self for writing. She remembers she created that outcome because in her real life, boys had treated her poorly, so she wrote a story where Konoha was adored and protected. As they walk, Iana feels a pang of guilt for making Yomi suffer and tries to persuade him to stop, but Yomi only pulls her into an embrace. He promises to get rid of Sol for frightening her. He then informs her that he set up magic around the tea area that should be activating any moment. On cue, an explosion rings out in the distance, causing Iana to panic and run toward the noise. She knows Yomi's magic isn't that powerful, and normally that wouldn't be a problem if Konoha had already awakened her magic. Iana knows Sol and Ginafort will do their best to protect her, and if they're caught off guard, they might not be able to help at all. In the area where the magic activates, a plant monster appears and lunges at Konoha. She's from aside and is about to be attacked again when Iana grabs one of the vines, swinging toward her to protect her. Iana desperately cuts at the stems and vines of the strange creature, thinking that Yomi's actions are her responsibility. She vows to erase both her death flags and Yomi's to make up for the terrible fate she had once written for him. Ginafort and Sol soon join Iana in fending off the monster and make quick work of it. Iana is stunned by how easily they defeat it and realizes that Yomi never had a chance of overcoming them. Sol and Ginafort immediately rush to check on Konoha, while Yomi goes directly to Iana. Iana overhears Sol telling Konoha and Ginafort that he suspects someone is targeting both Konoha and himself. He recalls the tea earlier, which carried a faint scent of poison he remembers from his childhood. Sol then brings up Iana's strange behavior and admits that he suspects she might know something. As Iana begins to panic, Yomi throws one of his gloves at Sol's face and boldly admits that he is the one responsible for the attempts on Sol's life. He declares that Iana is innocent and that he won't allow her to be suspected. He then challenges Sol, telling him to pick up the glove if he wishes to duel. Iana grows terrified that Sol might actually accept, hoping instead that he would handle the matter quietly, perhaps through assassination rather than causing a public scene. To her dismay, Sol picks up the glove without hesitation. Iana realizes she can't stop him because Sol deeply cares for Konoha, and after the man-eating plant nearly killed her, his fury, though calm on the surface, must be immense. She tries to talk Yomi down, but Konoha steps in, pleading with both men not to hurt each other and to talk things out instead. Iana realizes that no one in the story ever disobeys Konoha's requests, and this might be the key to stopping the duel. However, Yomi refuses to back off. In his desperation, he even captures Konoha, threatening to slap his other glove on her face so that she, too, will be part of the duel. This enrages Sol, who quickly retrieves Konoha and points his sword at Yomi. Iana recalls that Konoha has always been the reason for the extra dueling scenes she wrote, even if the scenes had nothing to do with the main plot. Sol apologizes to Konoha, explaining that turning down a duel that was already accepted means turning your back on the gods. Konoha tries to argue with Iana's support, but Ginafort agrees with Sol's reasoning. He backs Sol by saying that since Sol has already accepted the duel, it means he is prepared to lay his life on the line. Ginafort steps in front of Yomi and tells him that, under normal circumstances, he would have interrogated him. However, with a duel in place, he will not interfere. He adds that he's certain Sol will emerge victorious. But if Sol does lose, Ginafort will be the one to deal with Yomi personally. Yomi calmly replies that they should begin the duel. Ginafort instructs Yomi to choose which hand he will use, reminding him that the duel's rule allows only one hand to wield a sword. Yomi selects his right hand and throws the blade in his left to the ground, while Sol chooses his dominant left hand for the match. Ginafort declares that the duel will only end when one participant concedes or loses their life. Iana realizes how serious the duel is and curses her past self for ever making such rules. At Ginafort's signal, Sol and Yomi cross swords and the duel begins. Powerful strikes clash between them, their force sending gusts of wind that rustle Iana's and Konoha's clothes. As the battle continues, Iana realizes that Yomi stands no chance against Sol and tries to intervene, but Ginafort stops her. He tells Iana that she must not move until the duel concludes and the motives behind the plots are clear. The word plots catches Iana off guard. She recalls her past life when she used to pray to the gods and make strange requests. While her friends would pray for good grades or relationships, she would ask for magical powers. She truly believed it would work, often trying to channel energy through her hands or buying charms and amulets to enhance her non-existent magic, but nothing ever happened. Now, as she watches Sol and Yomi fight, Iana feels powerless within her own story, but something about the duel seems off. Yomi should be weaker than Sol, yet Sol hasn't defeated him. She wonders if Sol is holding back, but quickly dismisses the idea since Sol would never do that, especially with Konoha involved. Ginafort notices Sol's struggle as well, which makes Iana realize the truth. Sol must have injured himself when he saved her several nights ago. He had used his dominant hand back then, and that would explain his difficulty now. Iana falls to her knees, worried that Sol might actually lose the duel. While she's relieved that Yomi might survive, it doesn't mean her death flags will disappear. She understands now that, as the villainess of the story, her death flags will never truly go away. Determined to act, she rises to her feet. When Ginafort tries to stop her, she slaps his hand aside and dashes toward the duel. Iana realizes that regardless of who dies, she will still be suspected, so she needs to stop the fight. She throws herself between them just as Yomi is about to finish off Sol. Now standing between the two, she struggles to think of her next move. Yomi urges her to step aside so he can end the duel, but Iana tries to signal him to call it off instead. Yomi misinterprets her gestures, believing she's being manipulated by Sol and Konoha. Sol, meanwhile, tells her to move away since he cannot allow Yomi to live after threatening Konoha. Frustration builds inside Iana as she curses her fate for being reborn as Iana instead of Konoha. She knows that if Konoha were the one to plead, both men would easily yield to her words due to her tears. Unlike Konoha, she can't solve things with tears, so she takes another approach. She calls out Sol for fighting with an injured dominant hand, reminding him that failing to bring his best to a duel is already an insult to the gods. As Sol hesitates, distracted by her words, Iana seizes the chance to snatch his sword and points it at Yomi, declaring that she is now his opponent. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss new episodes every week.